a privilege to be here today. I am fascinated by languages in that it's really hard to translate completely one language from the other. You've got to really think in a language to be able to speak it the way it's meant to be spoken, at least if you want to do it fluently. And I think that the same is true for humans. There's a little bit of notion of this, but there's also a little bit of science of this. Out of the 3 billion base pairs that make up the human genome, 0.1% is what distinguishes one person from another. And that 0.1% may feel insignificant at start, but when computed, it does come out to be 3 million. And that is not small. I think that it's really hard to distill what makes us who we are into a very tight narrative, especially when asked to do it in 60 seconds, which is why I've never been successful in wheeling out a 60-second spiel. I almost always introduce myself as a walking identity crisis, and depending on the day and the room, I either get laughs or I get a few puzzled faces. And I think that's right, because we live in a highly specialized world. We're almost rewarded with convenience to precisely be able to say who we are, what we want, how we want it, how quickly we want it. And I think it's not just about the convenience, it's also a little bit about the credibility. When was the last time you listened to a TV show with an expert guest who wasn't an expert? When was the last time you heard a radio show or a podcast with a guest who wasn't an expert? And I think that has its merits in how businesses and markets have found their success. Adam Smith famously showed us how the individual processes that make up a pin, yes, the thing that holds things together, could be made exponentially more productive if there was a person tackling each element of it, from drawing out the wire, to cutting it, to sharpening it, to putting the ball at the head. All of those things could be broken down into individual divisions of labor. And I think that's why the education system spits out the specialists that it does. Before you've had the chance to navigate a quarter of your life, you're thrust into discipline and you're told to embody it. How is it that what mathematicians do for a living is so different and vastly different from what we do in school in math? There's a kind of excited curiosity that's both the engine and the rudder for good work. This popped up on my radar when Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, wrote this in an essay earlier this summer. The essay was titled "How to Do Great Work." And I think there's a lot of that excited curiosity that we have as children. We ask all of the big questions. Why does the world work the way it does? Why are we here? Who is God? And I think that excited curiosity diminishes with age. As we grow older, as we find our vocations, somehow we bifurcate our interests into what is something that we need to do to pay the bills, and what is something that we need to do to pursue our hobbies. And I call it the great sacrifice. But must it always be the great sacrifice? So a couple of years ago, I went around to ask myself the big questions. What kind of work do I want to do? And I reckon because work forms such a large part of our lives, and because work is so innately linked to our sense of purpose, that question quickly became, what kind of person do I want to be? And it was interesting, and at this point I should tell you, I spent about 10 years of my early life training in visual arts. I also went to engineering school, which means that I try to process complex things in diagrams. So I'm going to inflict one on you. I tried to distill something very complex into 3 dimensions that felt the most appropriate for where I wanted to be. Who we are in my head decomposed into the things that influence us, the things that we're good at, and the things that we do. And the more I tried to put the attributes that made me who I am around these shapes, they all started to converge around these dimensions as well, which gave me some comfort. So I stuck to it. I come from this place in India that's called Jaipur. It's the home of the Tata Group. For those of you who do not know who the Tatas are, they make everything from salt to steel. They started out with a venture called Tata Steel, which was built on a land inhabited by indigenous people. And when they started out, they made it a point to say that what comes from the people must go back multiple times over. And so what they built was a township where every Tata employee could have access to universal healthcare, potable water, electricity, housing, and roads where recycled plastic would go in. I have already told you that I studied visual arts, but the reason why I fell into literature and performing arts was because I also grew up in a Bengali household. So that meant exercising your right brain as much as your left brain. My parents are teachers and zoologists and engineers and athletes, which meant there was plenty of science and math and a little bit of martial arts, although I have to say that my career in karate was very brief and of a year. But that led me to pursue engineering. And I have to confess, a little bit of student aid helped as well. I went to Singapore, where I studied electrical and electronics engineering, and was fascinated by the dynamism of financial markets and technology. What made my eyes pop was also the inquiries that I was then leaning into during my time at Singapore. The issues of our lifetime, socioeconomic inequality, climate change, social justice. And by the end of it, I really wanted to know how the world works and why it works the way it does. These curiosities pent up in me brought me to policy school in the States. And while in policy school, I let myself unravel these inquiries a little bit more, delving into the nature of war, how political economies are shaped, how nation states are built and dismantled, how the financial profiles of the world's poorest, no matter where you are, looks exactly the same, and how technology sometimes, if done right, can help bring them into the fold of formal financial services. Most crucially, what I got out of that experience was this innate desire to influence capital in a positive way. I thought that capital was the nervous system of this world, and I really wanted to know how it was being raised, how it was being deployed, and by whom. So naturally, I went to investment banking and venture capital for the next couple of years. I interacted with some of the most tenacious, ambitious entrepreneurs in the world, people who had built companies, scaled them into multi-billion-dollar companies that employed hundreds of thousands of people around the world. A small, but not insignificant segment of them also deeply cared about driving positive sum outcomes in this world. In the very early days of my venture capital stint, I hosted a breakfast. And at this breakfast, My goal was to engineer serendipity amongst a set of people who had never met before and who had the common goal of making London's tech ecosystem a little bit more inclusive. A woman showed up who had been a founder and an investor, and she asked me all of the hard questions. What is preventing capital from reaching underrepresented founders, and what I was going to do about it? And I told her what I knew, I told her what I didn't know, and I told her what I hoped to do. And a couple of months later, I got this note from her that said, I would really like you to join me at a roundtable discussion at number 10 to discuss how we might increase financing for female entrepreneurs in the UK. I was humbled and I was surprised in equal parts. Fast forward to today, she's someone that I work for and I'm building a company with. We're working on scaling the way carbon removals can give us a fighting chance to get to net zero by 2050. How we pull carbon dioxide out of the Earth's atmosphere and sequester it deep in the Earth's land and ocean sinks. You see, by the end of last year, I was deeply exercised by the need to work on something directly that had an impact bigger than myself and was a problem that was bigger than my lifetime. She and I got together, yes, for breakfast again. She told me a little bit about how financial products and the lack thereof was preventing this industry from scaling to a gigaton level by mid-century. And I was hooked. The rest is history. I tell you all of these stories because these are the lenses through which I see the world. These are the lenses that make me who I am. And of course, it's easier connecting the dots looking backwards. Had I not spent enough time looking at the different facets of financial markets, had I not been completely exercised by wanting to disrupt the collective inertia of habitual motion that we all embody, I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing right now. But there is some truth in this quote that I put before you. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. John Muir was the father of the modern conservation movement. He's also credited with being an author, an environmentalist, and a scientist. And I think that's it. Building a range of skill sets, which is akin to the range of things that make us who we are, is one of the surest antidotes to the feelings of helplessness and despair that some of us might experience in a world that is becoming ever so complicated. Building contextual knowledge in different fields is a reason to try and connect the dots between different systems that allow us to see the world as more than its sum of the parts. And of course, there are going to be some things that don't necessarily turn out to be the things that you do in your daily life most often. For example, I didn't necessarily go work in a predominantly German-speaking organization right after I finished my German course, but it did help me pick out this example that I started today's talk with. Not everything that you do and you learn is something that will have the same degree of utility in your lives, but it surely will not be wasted. Thank you.